Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight show, folks, and this is Tony, your host. And today I have John Heasman on the show with a very important topic. And we were supposed to record this yesterday, but unfortunately, just a few minutes before we were due to record, my mixing board, which is old, completely gave up the ghost and died and didn't pass any signal, and I was scratching my head and finally came to the conclusion I can't do this. So I had to say, John, we can't do it today. And then I've ended up being able to borrow a mixing console from a friend of mine with a recording studio for a week or so. He's a good friend. We've worked together on audio for years. And so he said, look, borrow this. So it's a temporary solution. I'm still going to have to find, a console for myself because I route everything through it. But thank goodness I've got this one for a few days. And so, John, we were able to reschedule and do it today. So welcome.
Good morning, Tony. Yes, lovely.
Yes, well, it's afternoon for me, morning for you, but yeah, only just into the afternoon. So, yeah, our topic, I know you said, that's typical when we couldn't do it yesterday, that Satan won't want this getting out. So it is a pretty important topic, isn't it?
It absolutely. And to illustrate that, I want to tell you something absolutely mind-boggling. This morning at 8:45, when I got into my email, I received a message from a very dear friend who's in France, in Europe, directing me to a YouTube, which covers this topic infinitely better than I will be able to do today. And that cannot be a coincidence. I won't reveal what this particular YouTube is until the end of the interview, but it is brilliant and it covers all the bases that I will cover today.
Excellent. Okay, so that shows that we're on track, how important this is, and you may as well tell them what the subject is.
Well, the subject is 5G, and I've got to explain what 5G means, and to do that I need to go back a little bit and describe some of, just very briefly, the sort of physics behind the whole electromagnetic spectrum. So maybe we'll do that. But before, I guess I better introduce myself. I'm John Heasman. I'm now 79 in my 79th year. My background is in mechanical engineering, but I worked with what was then the Electricity Commission of New South Wales, starting in 1966, and I worked at what became one of the largest generating stations in New South Wales, which has since been sold to private industry, to a consortium that includes the Chinese, and they, in their wisdom, have actually shut the station down. And it ranged in size from 30 megawatt units, 60 megawatt units, and then jumped to 500 megawatt units. What I'm talking about is a megawatt is 1 million watts, so we're talking about a lot of power.
Sure are.
I'm going to direct your listeners, Tony, to some experts in this whole area of microwave technology. The first being Barry Trower, who is housed from the UK, and he covers the background of the technology itself. I want to talk about Dr. Magna Havas, who hails from Canada. She's a medical doctor, and she will be covering the health effects or the adverse health effects of microwave frequencies. And Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, who was originally from Germany but has lived in the USA for many decades and practices out of Seattle on the west coast of the United States, and is probably the leading medical expert on the topic of the adverse effects of microwave exposure. So they're just three, and there are many, many other experts in this area, but they're just three of the ones that come to mind.
So, like 5G is something that most of us don't really understand. Let's be honest, I'm included, and many of us have concerns though. So, you're going to help us to get a handle today, I think, on are our concerns real, and why we should be concerned.
They're very, very real, and we should be super concerned about this. I mean, Joy is hypersensitive to electromagnetic radiation, and we'll cover that a little later. But we have one friend who happens to be a brilliant violinist who at the moment cannot even play his violin as a result of the effects of electromagnetic radiation, mainly from things like mobile phones, Wi-Fi. We're now into the smart meter generation. There are lots and lots of devices that we now use every day, and they're very, very convenient. And I want to tell your listeners that I am not anti-technology, anything but. If it wasn't for this technology, you and I wouldn't be talking right at the moment. And it is incredibly valuable. I use Google every day, for instance, which is really like an encyclopedia. When I'm writing something and I can't spell a word, I just whack it into Google and immediately it tells me, the correct spelling for that word. So I'm not anti-technology, but I am very, very concerned about the health or the adverse health effects of this technology.
Yeah, and I know you're not the only one. So perhaps, and because you've kind of got a background in a lot of this electrical engineering stuff, you understand how it all works a lot better than most of us do.
That's right. I willingly admit I'm not an expert in this area, but I do have a lot of knowledge. And in reality, we have a lot of friends who are now very, very sensitive to these frequencies in the microwave band, which probably brings us to the part of the interview where I ought to explain a little bit of background of what we're talking about. So what is these electromagnetic frequencies? We want to talk about the electromagnetic frequency spectrum. Now, I want to explain right from the word go. This is an infinite spectrum. If you go way down the left-hand side, if you like, you get into very, very long wavelengths, which can include millions or billions of light years long. And if you go to the other end of the spectrum, you get to wavelengths which are so tiny we can't really even describe them. But I've got some diagrams that you can use as background material. And the first one is just a simple sine wave that illustrates what I'm talking about when I talk about wavelength. It's simply if you start anywhere on a wave and you go to exactly the same position, say to the right or to the left, then that is one wavelength or one cycle. The amplitude is illustrated by the height of the wave, either positively or negatively, and the frequency is measured in hertz. Now, hertz actually simply means cycles per second. So 1 hertz, for instance, equals 1 cycle per second. 1 kilohertz equals 1,000 cycles a second. 1 megahertz equals 1,000,000 cycles a second. And 1 gigahertz equals 1,000,000,000,000 cycles per second. And we could go on, but that's really all we need to know at this stage. I've then got a couple of very good diagrams that illustrate what I'm talking about, the electromagnetic spectrum. And the first one, in it has a red section across the top of the diagram, which, and I'm going to read what it actually says in that red section. It says, we are surrounded by electromagnetic radiation, which is summarized as EMR, like never before. Studies link EMR to cancer, Alzheimer's, autism, chronic fatigue, headaches, and other health issues. And then when you have a look at the diagram, you can see the illustration indicating down the left-hand end long wavelengths, and up at the right-hand end, very, very short wavelengths. And then as you go further down into the diagram, it illustrates various spectrums within this overall spectrum, starting right down at the left-hand end with low frequencies.
Sorry, John, I just want to interrupt for a second, just to let people know that aren't watching in the video. You know, a lot of people just listen to the audio. We will have these diagrams as a PDF download on our website associated with this interview, so people can actually go and see exactly what John is talking about with these diagrams and so on. It's a pretty comprehensive PDF that John's put together. Sorry to interrupt, John. Carry on.
That's fine, Tony, and I encourage your listeners to do exactly the same. So on this diagram, down the left-hand end, which is the long wavelengths, you get things like the power systems that are used to provide subways, and some of those are very low frequencies, down to 16 cycles a second, 25 cycles a second. And then we come up to our normal AC power systems that we use all over the world, which go back to Nikola Tesla, by the way. And here in Australia and New Zealand and most of the British Commonwealth countries, we use a 50 cycle a second system, which means that the generator that generates this electricity is spinning at 3,000 revs a second. In North America, the listeners who are there, your system works at 60 cycles a second, which is equivalent to 3,600 revs per minute. Okay, and we work up to the right of the diagram. We then come into what are known as very low frequencies, and these are the frequencies that we use for things like monitors, computer monitors. Then we come up into the AM and FM bands. These are our normal radio frequency bands. Then into the TV bands. Then we come into the cell phones, or what we call here in the rest of the world mobile phones, but same thing, mobile phones, cell phones. And that's in the lower end of the microwave band of frequencies. And we'll say a lot more about this shortly. We then go up into the sort of higher end of the microwave band, where they use the frequencies for communicating with satellites. And then we come into this incredible band, which starts with infrared radiation, then into a very small part of the overall spectrum, which is the visible light band. And then we go into the ultraviolet area, and then we get into a area of the spectrum which is called ionizing frequencies, which are familiar to us by X-rays and other radioactive sources. Now, I've got a separate diagram which goes into this in a bit more detail, gives a lot of other illustrations under it that give you an idea of what sort of devices are used in the various frequency bands. Okay, so what the particular area we are looking at is the microwave frequency band. Now, if we go down...
you might want to just tell our listeners what that band is, roughly, if anyone's not looking.
No, that's fine. Okay, so that extends from 300. This is the official definition that comes from the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency. A bit of a mouthful, but that's the organisation that actually sets the standards here in Australia. And that has been so since about 1998-99. It was in the responsibility of the Standards Association of Australia, which at that time covered both Australia and New Zealand. But at that time, for basically political reasons, the responsibility was handed over to this other organisation, which up to that point in time only dealt with radioactive type of radiation. So they're now responsible for setting the standards for even this band of frequencies, which starts at 300 megahertz and ends at 300 gigahertz. So that's the official definition And that's the band of frequencies in which our television stations, our mobile or cell phone devices operate. And then, as I mentioned before, then the satellite to Earth communication, and so forth. And as I mentioned, in the middle of that is this tiny little band of the visible spectrum. And I've also included a graphic of that, which starts on the left-hand end in total blackness, then goes into what we now know as the red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and violet of our visible frequencies, and then goes into a black area further up. Okay. So what are the frequencies that are used for our communication devices? And again, I'll just skip through this very quickly, but we have at the low end, we have what we call extremely low frequencies, and they are in the band of about 30 hertz to 300 hertz. And I've got to say that in the band lower than that, from say 0 to 30 hertz, are a lot of extremely important frequencies that our human bodies depend on for health. And anyway, we'll come back to that later. And then going up through the frequencies, you've got voice frequencies from 30 to 3,000 hertz, or 3 kilohertz, I'm sorry. Then very low frequencies from 3 to 30 kilohertz, and so forth. I'll skip this, and we get up the high end, extremely high frequencies from 30 to 300 gigahertz. And the particular frequencies,
which are way above our hearing range.
Anything that's being used in the cell phone or mobile phone area at the moment. The particular one that we're interested in is this area of about 1 gigahertz up to about 30. That's the area that most of our devices are used at the moment. Okay. Now, if we look at the generations of mobile phone development, we start back in about 1980, and it's really quite interesting that these go in perfect decades. So we start from 1980 to about 1990, where we had the first generation, or 1G, of mobile phones. And then from about 1990 to 2000, we go into the second generation, and the frequencies change dramatically from an analog signal for the first generation. Now we're into digital signals, and nominally we're talking about 1.8 gigahertz for the second generation. And there are still countries in the world that are still using 2G. For instance, Mexico still have 2G operating. Most other countries now only have 3G, 4G, and now we're going into 5G. Okay, so 3G really spanned the decade of 2000 to 2010. Then we have 4G from 2010 to the present time, and now we're right on the cusp of entering the 5G.
That's interesting too, by the way. I didn't actually know what the G stood for. Now that you've shown that it actually stands for generations, it makes sense.
That's exactly right. So it's a whole generation of basically mobile phones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the frequency, as I mentioned, for 2G was about 1.8. The 3G frequencies are somewhere between 1.6 and 2 gigahertz. The 4G between 2 and 8 gigahertz, depending on your provider. And then in the 5G band, it can be anywhere between 3 and 300 gigahertz. Now, the early development of this will be down the low end, but they're talking about experimenting, or more than experimenting, and actually producing devices that work in the high end, up near the 300 gigahertz end. So we have another diagram that hopefully you can show the listeners, or they can go to my PDF document, which shows the evolution of mobile phone communications starting in about 1980 and going right through to about 2030. So again, this is a diagram which shows the developmental time period, and then the early commercialization, and then the period where it became commercialized and then cut off. So if you look at 1G, for instance, you start in about 1980, and then somewhere in the mid-90s, really that was obsolete. And over the same period of time, the 2G communication system was developed. That started in probably the late 80s, and it's still going in some parts of the world. Then the 3G system started in about the early 90s in its developmental time, went online in probably the late decade of 2000 to 2010, and that's the system that most of us are using at the moment. My mobile phone, for instance, is a 3G mobile phone. And then we go into the era of smartphones, which really started to be developed in the early 2000s. And now, the majority of the world's population are using those phones. So probably smartphones is a better terminology than cell phones or mobile phones, because that's what everybody's using right at the moment. And so they started to be developed, as I said, in the early 2000s. They went commercial in probably about 2015, and that's what most people are using at the moment. Now, at the same time, the technological companies were developing what we are now being told is 5G, and that we are being told will come online in about 2020. I want to tell you, Tony, that is online right at the moment and right in the major city, which is only about 30 kilometres from where I'm sitting. There are now at least 7 towers in Toowoomba, which is a city of about 100,000 people, which is about 100 kilometres inland from Brisbane, which is the capital of the state of Queensland here in Queensland. And we've already got 7 towers with 5G equipment installed. Precisely what they're doing with that at the moment, I don't know. But they're there, and presumably they're conducting tests and everything else. Okay. There's another diagram that hopefully you can put up on screen for the listeners, that is produced by Optus, which I ought to explain. In Australia, there are 3 main suppliers or providers of mobile phone technology, and they are Telstra, Optus and Vodafone. They're the 3 main ones. And Optus has put out a diagram here which again illustrates the evolution of the mobile phone generations. And they're saying, for instance, that in using 1G technology, you could download an 800 megabyte movie in 1.5 days. That's how long it took to download 800 megabytes. With 2G, you could download the same movie in 7 hours. With 3G, just over 4 hours. With 4G, in about 43 seconds. And with 5G, they're estimating that you could download the same movie in 1 second.
Wow.
So no wonder people are enthusiastic about the technology, and I don't blame them. It's fantastic stuff. But what about the negative issues, the health issues?
So why is there a concern, though, with this increased technology? I mean, people are going to be thinking, well, this is great, like you just said, that, everything works so much faster and we can download and upload and so on, and, compared to what it used to be. But so why isn't that a good thing? Okay.
I really think that we ought to start with our own personal experience. That's Joy and I, and Joy in particular. And here I want to make a confession. When we first came to live where we are at the moment, which is 6 years ago, almost exactly 6 years ago, Joy, I said to Joy, look, we need to install some cordless phones We need to get some modems with wireless facilities so you can use your laptop anywhere in the house and so forth. And she begged me not to do that. So, the evolution in my own life on the awareness of how dangerous these microwave frequencies are is very, very new. It's really only about 6 years old. And I initially went ahead and I bought a cordless phone and installed it. We had a modem with the wireless facility on it. And she started to get symptoms, headaches, symptoms like vertigo. And we had a friend, and we still have it, the same friend, who is super sensitive to these frequencies. He is a Vietnam veteran. He was involved in all this sort of equipment, in radar and so forth, and communications equipment way back in the Vietnam War. And he is hypersensitive to these frequencies. And he came and he stayed with us 6 years ago, and he only could stay one night. He had to get out because the first thing he wanted to do was turn off the wireless feature of my modem, what North Americans call routers. And at that stage, I didn't even know how to do that. We've gone from that. We have evolved, if you like, from that to having no wireless in the house whatsoever. Everything is now connected to our computers by cable. Every wireless device in the house is turned off. And the only time it's ever turned on now is when we have visitors who have things like tablets that they want to get online with. And I will give them instructions. Yes, I will turn it on. I will get right away from the router. And when you've finished using doing whatever you want to do, please turn it off again. And I demonstrate to them how to turn it off and on. So it was a very personal thing as far as we were concerned. And since that time, we've met not only our Vietnam veteran friend, but we now have a friend who is a brilliant, absolutely brilliant professional violinist who is the most sensitive person I've ever met in my life. And he is better than my meter that I have to detect these signals. He will pick them up much, much earlier than even my meter can pick them up. But it has had a terrible effect on his life. And currently he's not able to even to play his violin. So it's a very, very personal thing that brought us into a realization that these frequencies are very, very dangerous.
What about the skeptics? They're going to say, well, how do you know it's that's causing it? It could be something else. Or some people might say, oh, it's psychosomatic or whatever. How can you pinpoint that's what is the cause?
Oh, no, I appreciate that. And the same sort of arguments apply to people who have Lyme disease, for instance. Officially, according to our medical authorities in this country, we don't have Lyme disease in Australia, and that is absolutely nonsense. But anyway, how do I answer the question? Well, the question can only really be answered when you personally begin to be affected negatively by these same frequencies. And now that is becoming more and more frequent. The other night we had a phone call from someone we'd never even met from Sydney in her 70s who is now becoming affected by these frequencies, and we are trying to help her to protect herself. She's basically in the centre of Sydney, surrounded by mobile phone towers. She's probably got a smart meter fixed to the wall of her house. Maybe I ought to digress here a little. We have a friend who lived in Sydney. She's no longer in Sydney. And she rang us one day and said, I don't know what's happening, but we're all getting sick. We're lethargic. It's even affecting the dog. And she prayed about this situation, and she felt that the Lord was saying to her, go and have a look inside your meter box, which on normal houses are somewhere on the outside of the building. And she did this, and when she opened it, she noticed that there was a brand new meter installed. At this stage, she had no idea what it was. And she rang me, and I gave her some advice and said, look, you need to get yourself a meter that will detect these frequencies, which she did, and then realized that she and her mother, who is in her 90s now, I think, and the dog were being absolutely bombarded by these frequencies, and it was having a very, very negative effect on their health. And then she went to the electricity authorities and said, why have you installed this meter? We didn't give you, and they basically said to her, lady, this is mandatory. You have no choice. We have the right to come in and do whatever we like. And then I told her that is not true. I discovered that the Minister for Energy in New South Wales only a few months previously had made a press statement stating exactly the opposite, saying that these meters are not mandatory. If you don't want them installed on your house, you just have to say the word, and that's the end of the story. And so she got this document. I gave her the document. She went into the electricity authorities. She spoke to the personnel manager, who happened to be a woman, who was a very nice lady, and she went upstairs to the chief executives of this particular power distribution authority, stuck it under their noses, and they went red. They went red in the faces because they knew how dangerous this technology was, but they not only were they not telling the general public and telling the general public actually lies, but they were telling their own technicians lies. And eventually this friend of ours, a technician, came along one day to try and persuade her that she was, it was all in her head. And so she pulled out this meter and demonstrated to him, and he nearly fell over. And he said, lady, can I come back to you personally after hours and talk to you about this? Because I am in my early 30s. I was a triathlon runner. I've worked for this organization for less than 2 years. I now have very serious health problems. So this is very real stuff, Tony.
And the thing is, is it going to get worse with 5G? I think that's it. Because some people are going to go, well, we haven't noticed it affecting us with 3G and 4G and smart meters and so on. But is it going to actually get worse when they introduce 5G?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's bad enough now. And one of the reasons people are not finding that or claiming that it's not affecting them is that there is a time delay here. And normally some of the very negative health effects won't show up within a period of 5 years. And so you'll find that all the studies done by the technical companies that develop this technology, they all cut off before the 5-year period, because they know full well if they continue their studies over 5 years, it will be obvious how dangerous this technology is.
Okay, well, yeah, basically, how does it affect people? And particularly, say, does it affect people's genes and, genetically and so on, that type of thing?
My advice to anyone listening at the moment, if this is new to you and you're still skeptical about what we're saying, the place to start is go and watch a video which is now probably almost a decade old by Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt. Now, it's called Smart Meters and EMR standing for Electromagnetic Radiation, the Health Crisis of Our Time. Now, I mentioned that Dr. Klinghardt was trained in Germany, and Joy and I eventually, because Joy was getting so sick as a result of exposure to some of these frequencies, we went and saw a doctor here in Australia, and I won't mention his name, but he also is an expert in this area. And on the very first day that we visited him, out of the blue, and this has got to be divine, he said to us, "Oh, my friend Dr. Klinghardt," and I nearly fell off the chair. And I said to him, "You know Klinghardt?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, we're the best of friends. We went to university together in Germany." I thought, wow. And this particular doctor here in Australia was the first man to introduce what's known as bioresonance technology, which both detects but basically anything wrong with you, and also is able to correct those illnesses. I'll go through a list of these things in a minute, but all I'm saying is start there. Start with Dr. Klinghart's video. It's not very long, but it's a real eye-opener. And then I want to read to you now a statement from Dr. Kun Lee, who is also a medical person with a PhD and so forth. And I'm going to quote this. It's a little bit out of date. It was quoted in 2011, and it was a response to the California Council on Science and Technology. And I will quote now. It says, currently there are no national or international standards in inverted commas, for safety levels of radio frequency devices. Now that's strictly not technically correct, because we do have standards now, both here in Australia and in New Zealand. However, he goes on to say what the FCC, which stands for the Federal Communications Commission in the United States, is currently using are guidelines which have much lower certainty than a standard. One can go to many governmental agencies' websites like the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, or the Food and Drug Administration to verify this. Therefore, for anyone to claim that they meet the Federal Communication Commission standards gives a false impression of safety, certainly compared to guidelines, which implies that a lot is unknown. So what he's saying is, if it's not a standard and it's simply a guideline, it's admitting that there are a lot of unknown factors involved in setting the guidelines even. So he then goes on to say the current Federal Communications Commission guidelines only deal with thermal effects. Now, I want to emphasize this, Tony, thermal effects. In other words, the effects that these frequencies have on our body in increasing the temperature of our bodies. They don't go into anything to do with the biological effects on our bodies. So meeting the current Federal Communication Commission guidelines in the best case scenario only means that one won't have heat damage. It says nothing about the safety from the risk of many chronic diseases that the public is most concerned about, such as cancer, miscarriage, birth defects, semen quality, autoimmune diseases, and the list goes on and on. I'm continuing the quote here. Therefore, when it comes to non-thermal effects of radio frequency, that is the biological effects, which is the most relevant effect for public concerns, the Federal Communications Commission guidelines are irrelevant and cannot be used for any claims of safety unless we're addressing heat damage. Now, in order to be damaged from heat, you would have to literally be wearing your the router that you use to connect to the internet to your computer. You would have to be actually wearing that next to your body, and definitely, if you did that, you would feel the heat coming into your body without any doubt. And just finishing the quotation, the bottom line is that the safety level for radio frequency exposure related to non-thermal effects is unknown at present, and whoever claims that their device is safe regarding non-thermal effects is either ignorant or misleading, end of quote.
So are there any actual safe levels of radiation exposure?
Well, that's very hard to say because, and I will refer to the listeners to the latest video or YouTube that I got this morning, because it goes into that in a lot more detail. But I will illustrate this in a minute by looking at a comparison of the limits most of which are just guidelines, by the way. They're not standards. And again, the listeners can bring this up either on the PDFs, or hopefully you can give it as a background document. But it is headed the Microwave Exposure Limits Country Comparisons. And this is microwave exposure limits in exactly the same range, 300 megahertz to 300 gigahertz. Now, the thing that really stands out in this table, and there are 3 columns with different units at the top of it. The first column starts with microwatts per square centimetre. The second column is microwatts per square metre. And the third one is watts per square metre. Now, the important one is the central column. And if you look at that, and you look at countries like Canada, the USA, Germany, Australia, and New Zealand in particular, the guidelines, or in our case, in Australia and New Zealand, the standards set the limit at 10 million, listen to this figure, 10 million microwatts per square metre. And I want to go to the other end of the scale, which is Austria in Europe, which sets a limit of, for outdoor, if you're outside, it's 10, and indoor it's 1. So we're comparing in Austria 1, okay, forget about the units for a minute, to 10 million
Wow.
in Canada, USA, Germany, Australia, and New Zealand. So in some other countries, if we go to places like China, Russia, Italy, France, Poland, Hungary, that figure reduces to 100,000. In Switzerland, it's about the same, about 100,000. In places like Belgium, Bulgaria, Luxembourg, and Ukraine, it's 24,000. Liechtenstein, 1,000.
Yeah, so it's a huge difference. I mean,
Massive.
from 10 million to 1 or 10.
Absolutely.
I mean, for goodness sake, how do they manage to come up with such, varying limits? It's beyond me.
Exactly. So the bottom line is the standards, the limits set by the standards, certainly in the USA, Australia, New Zealand, and Germany, are totally inadequate for protecting us from biological effects.
What about microwave weapons? I mean, don't they use this very stuff for microwave weapons?
Absolutely. And that's where Barry Trower comes in, because Barry Trower is a retired, he worked for the British Navy developing microwave weapons way back. And since that time, he's spent in his retirement, and I think he's in his 80s now, going all around the world, warning people about the dangers of these microwave frequencies. He was actually asked by a division of the British police force, I think it was in Devon in England originally, to do a study for them, because they were concerned that a large number of their young officers, both male and female, were getting cancers or leukemia, and they couldn't understand, well, why is this happening? And it turns out that they were issued with a two-way communication system, which is called Tetra, which is now used by some of our own police forces and firefighters and ambulances and so forth, and especially in the mining industry here in Australia, they're using the same equipment. And you'll see photographs of English police men and women wearing these devices on their chests, very close to their heads, so that they can basically talk into them without removing them from their holsters. And these devices are having an unbelievably negative health effect on the people in Great Britain that are using this equipment. And it's now spreading, of course, around the world. Another quote I want to make here, and this is from a site called Defender Shield, And I'll quote, it says, "In short, there is no real safe levels of radiation exposure. When it comes to electromagnetic radiations from electronic devices like laptops and tablets, exposure is just an inevitable part of life. As we continue to learn more about health dangers from non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation," what does that mean? That means exactly the radiation in the microwave band, ionizing radiation meaning things like X-rays, radiation contact, we should do everything we can to limit our personal exposure with electromagnetic frequency protection. And while the specific chronic radiation exposure limits need more definition, the best course of action, and the one recommended by experts, is to avoid extra doses of electromagnetic radiation whenever you can.
Yeah, okay. That's very, very interesting. So we're in uncharted territory in many ways. So have there been really any kind of in-depth studies on the effects of this done, ones that have got any meaning to them? And if so, where?
Okay. What I would point you to is a thing called the Bioinitiative Report, which was first published in 2007 and has been updated fairly regularly ever since. And one of the people that I recommend that you watch also is Professor Olli Johansson, who is a Swedish scientist and professor. And he was part of the original report, the Bioinitiative Report in 2007. So for your listeners, just simply go into Google, put it in Bioinitiative Report, and you'll get all the information with regard to that. Now, of course, there have been representatives of the major telecommunication companies who have said that this report is a lot of nonsense, but I want to tell you it is not. It is absolutely essential reading for anyone who wants to look into the background of the biological health issues with respect to microwaves. The other person I mentioned was Dr. Magda Havas from Canada, and there are a lot of very, very good videos on this subject from her. There's one called The Microwave Radiation Effects of the Heart. There's another one by her. These are all very short, but very, very good YouTubes. This one's called The Microwave Radiation Dangers in Your Home, and she demonstrates that very, very effectively, both from a visual point of view, in other words, you can see the values that are coming up, and from an audio point of view. And it's the audio point of view that really sets people back when you demonstrate this with a meter, such as I own, and you demonstrate the signal without the Wi-Fi signal, and then you turn the Wi-Fi on, and then you can hear what sounds like a machine gun going off. And if you're located within a meter of that device, you're in trouble, real trouble. Okay, and there's another one by her entitled Live Blood and Electrosmog, which is very, very an effective video that shows the effect of microwaves on the blood cells, the red blood cells in particular, in exposure to microwaves, where the red blood cells literally stick together, which makes them very difficult for them to go through small capillaries, especially the sort of capillaries that we have behind it in our eyes.
Apart from Australia, well, let's look at, say, other countries like Israel and so on.
Yes.
What's going on in Israel? I noticed I've just seen that mentioned here in your PDF.
Yes, I was fascinated to find out what was actually going on in Israel, and the answer is they're being very, I don't know what I can say here. They are very much aware of the dangers of these things because You can read about it in their publications. These are publications that come straight out of Israel. For instance, I'll quote here from one of these publications. Basically, it's saying the guidelines regarding radiation from Wi-Fi systems and the end user devices used by staff and students in both schools and universities. And I'll just quote a few things here. It says preference will be given to teaching through computer applications that do not require using the wireless network. That is very, very significant. Here's another one. For grades 1 and 2, they're setting a limit 1 hour per day and no more than 3 days a week. That is, no more than 3 hours per week for those young students to be exposed to Wi-Fi. And for grades 3, up to 2 hours a day and no more than 4 hours per week. That is a total of 8 hours a week. So this is Israel, who are the leaders in the development of this technology, by the way.
It's pretty telling, isn't it?
It is. It is.
It tells you that there's definitely real concerns, aren't they? So what are some common symptoms of exposure to electromagnetic radiation?
Okay, let's get on to that topic. Okay. The milder ones, these are some of the common symptoms, are sleep problems. And I will verify that. When friends of mine have been in this house and I've explained to them, yes, you can have the Wi-Fi on while you want to use your tablet or whatever, but please, as soon as you've finished, go and turn it off. Well, we had some friends here who turned it on and then forgot to turn it off. And I came and I sat here for about 3 hours working on my computer and didn't realize I was being bombarded by the wireless signal from my router or modem, which is less than a meter from my head on my desk, but it's hidden behind my printer, one of my printers. So I wasn't aware that it was on. And then at that night, I thought, why is my brain racing? Why can't I get to sleep? So I came out here into the living room and checked my router, and lo and behold, the wireless signal was still on. So it definitely affects sleep.
And it can affect, looking at the list here, we better go through it very quickly. Headaches, stress, memory, heart problems, depression, fatigue, irritability, anxiety, skin problems, nausea. There's a whole bunch. There's a lot more to it as well. But just for the sake of time, we better skip through that, I think.
Yes, there's another site that suggests concentration problems, and I would tick all of these off, by the way. Memory lapses, absolutely. We have friends that, are suffering from these things now. Aches or pressures in the head, throat or chest, unsteady balance or dizziness. Joy will tell you all about that. Altered heart rate, ringing in the ears, very, very common.
Okay, so this is a thing. It can be causing tinnitus, basically.
Absolutely.
Well, now that's something I might mention to somebody who is suffering from it and is constantly, basically, got the Wi-Fi on.
Absolutely. Especially if you're using Wi-Fi headphones, for instance. Worst thing you could ever use. Okay, altered heart rate, ringing ears, excessive fatigue, what we now call chronic fatigue.
Yeah.
Almost certainly is triggered. There are many other reasons for chronic fatigue, but this is one of them. Numbness or pain in affected areas, sleep disturbances, eye irritation, red skin blotches, and eczema.
Yeah.
So there are only a few of them. They're the least.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch more. I just think we're going to have to skip past that. People can look at it, though, in the PDF. Now, I just want to move on then to the situation in Toowoomba. Okay, you mentioned that they've already got that, being set up there. What can you tell us about it?
Okay, again, for your listeners, we live about 30 kilometres north of Toowoomba, which is a town of about 100,000, depending where you draw the circle, obviously. And it just so happens that last Friday I had to drive into Toowoomba while I was in the middle of preparing for this presentation to pick up a new pair of eyeglasses. And having done that, I then decided to take a shortcut, what I thought was a shortcut on the way home. And I was following directions from the GPS in my car, and it turned out the GPS was wrong because I wanted to turn down a street, and when I actually got to the intersection, it said no through road, and not only that, but the name of the road was different from what it was on my GPS. So I thought, this is interesting. I'm going to investigate this. So I then went around to where I was able to get into the road that showed up on my GPS, and I thought, I'll drive to the top of the hill. So I drove to the top of the hill, which is called Mount Lofty, and to my utter surprise, I found something like 4 or 5 huge transmission towers, one of which was owned by Optus and probably Vodafone, although the ownership of these towers doesn't, the fact that Telstra is using the tower doesn't necessarily mean that it's a Telstra tower. It could be owned by another private consortium, and these suppliers are just using the towers. Anyway, what amazed me was that I discovered what I think is the largest Telstra, which is our biggest telecommunication company here in Australia, the largest tower probably in the whole of Toowoomba. And the thing that amazed me was what I found at the base of that tower, and I've got photographs in the PDF documents of this, was behind the security fence, was a whole pile of rubbish. And not only that, but there was some sort of new, I don't know what you call it. They all look a bit like containers, actually, but they're actually portable, the building itself. Anyway, there's a portable building on the outside of the permanent safety fence with a temporary safety fence around it. And I thought, that's peculiar. I bet that's got something to do with 5G. So I took a lot of very detailed photographs. And then when I got home, by the way, this Telstra centre is bang next door to one of our television stations. It's called WIN, and it has aerials as well. Anyway, when I got home, I got online and I put in the details of that was shown on one of the signs on the safety fence, which said, and I've got to put my glasses on here because I can't read it, which said NSA site number, and then it gave the number. And what it stands for is the national, or what they call themselves, the National Safety Agency here in Australia. That it's a global consulting, technology and services organisation specialising in this public safety, critical infrastructure, resilience and homeland security sectors. Well, we don't use that term here in Australia, homeland security sectors.
That's the Americans.
It's an American.
Yeah.
This is obviously an international company.
Yeah, and the NSA is, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So our work, this is a quote from their own website, our work includes, but is not limited to product evaluation, technology research and development, managed services, project management services and consulting, blah, 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 blah. Okay, but the beauty of it is that they enable you to get in and discover, if you've got the NSA site number, to discover what is on these towers. And what I discovered was not only was that tower now 5G ready, but there were 6 other towers in Toowoomba as well that are 5G ready. And I give you all this information in the PDF documents.
Yeah,
so
it's pretty comprehensive. I'm just scrolling through it.
And what I say at the end there is that, that raises the question, what about the safety of the general public? Okay, because they concentrate in their site on the safety of their technicians, but they really are not addressing the safety of the general public. And the warnings are minimal. The safe levels are setting guidelines and standards, especially in the UK, USA, Canada, Germany, Australia, and New Zealand are totally, this is my words, they are totally inadequate to protect us from the biological effects.
Well, I mean, just looking at this, they've got warning signs all over the place, RF hazard area, and so on and so forth. They're basically telling you that radio frequency is dangerous. Radio frequency, caution, radio frequency with radiation within, and so on. I mean, far out. I mean, surely that's telling you straight off that this isn't just a harmless thing.
Absolutely. And it also, Tony, raises the question, why do we need these huge towers? Why do we need a massive amount of power that they're using? Because you don't need that for mobile phones, right? And to prove that, the fact is that our little things that we hold in our hands can communicate with these towers with no problem at all using microwatts. Very small amounts of power. And in fact, in other countries of the world, I understand, for instance, in Mexico, they don't use such big towers, which brings me on to another issue, which concerns Hampton here, where I live. And the fact that the exchange, the Telstra telephone exchange here in Hampton, has only very recently, within the last month or so, installed a 4G antenna, which is tiny, okay? Which raises the question, why couldn't they do that from the very beginning? Why do we need these huge towers, all right? Now, I can speculate, and some of it's not speculation, it really is based on good research, that they're using them for other nefarious purposes.
And that's, I think, what we are all suspecting, including things like, obviously spying ability. Then they've even got the ability to, if there's chips in your money, for example, at some point they could just use these towers to obliterate the chip in the money.
Absolutely. Or even mind controllers.
Exactly, yes. Beaming frequencies, we've got the audio... I forget now, I've got the patent somewhere, where they can basically beam into your brain voices and so forth.
Yes, this is called the voice of God technology.
Yeah, that's it, which is probably, we're too far into this now to be able to cover that in this show. But there's a whole lot more in that area that definitely concerns us as to, to why are they setting these towers up? And, that's probably a subject for another day, but what can we do to protect ourselves from this stuff?
Okay, there are a number of things you can do, and it's better to go into the sites that I've suggested. First of all, I really believe that you need a proper detection device, because all of these signals are way outside our normal senses, right? Our senses of sight and hearing and smelling and so forth. Okay, you can't detect them with our normal human. You can, in fact, use AM radios or FM radios, very simple portable devices, but you really need something a bit more sophisticated than that to demonstrate to someone who's skeptical about this what it's all about. So that's the first thing I would say. Then I would suggest there are protective devices and protection strategies. And the best site I've come across is a site called thebestemfhealth.com. And get into that site, and I've given it to you in the PDF copy. It goes down through, I don't know how many points, but here's a few of them. Develop your understanding of EMFs, which is the whole purpose of this particular interview. Distance from EMFs is the only true complete EMF safety. All right, the further you get away from the device, the better it is. Detectors are the only way to know, which I've just said for sure, where your EMF sources are and how strong. This is an important one too. Discharge them as soon as possible from your body. How do you do that? You simply take off your shoes and socks, go out and walk on your lawn for about a few minutes. Doesn't take long, and that will actually discharge a lot of the effects of the EMF. repair the damage and restore. Well, there's all sorts of things in there. And then a list of diseases. We've discussed some of them, but not the really important ones like cancer and so forth. And there is no doubt that there is a connection between brain tumors and EMF. No doubt about it. And there are plenty of studies that illustrate that. And then I've got a summary from Dr. McCullough. He is a very, very good site to get into on this one. And again, he's got a whole list of things that you can do. And then finally, and this I haven't got on your copy of the PDF, Tony, but the last word is there are devices, and this particular device that I'm going to mention now was actually designed in New Zealand, I think your hometown. And it's called Blue Shield. I don't know whether you've heard of this.
No, I haven't.
But they produce devices that you can either plug into the wall or a portable device that you can carry with you. That definitely works because as far as Joy and I and some of our close friends are concerned, it definitely works. And it's worthwhile looking at. But I've said here that one of our friends who is hypersensitive to EMR claims that they have no positive effect at all. And therefore, it appears that there are a few devices that don't work. There are a few devices that work for everyone. All right, it's a bit like everything. Aspirin works with some people, doesn't work with others. As far as I'm concerned, it's magic. Aspirin is a magical device. Okay, the last thing I want to say is get in and see this video, which I haven't even completely watched because it came in at about 8:40 this morning into my email. And it's called Wireless Warfare Exposed, Includes Ways to Protect Your Family. It's an hour and 15 minutes long. It's already had 275,000 views. It's produced by a lady named Dana Ashley. And you should be able to find that by putting that into Google. Wireless Warfare Exposed, Includes Ways to Protect Your Family. And I think it was produced in, it's a very, very recent video that Joy and I have still not. But it's got stuff in there that will blow your mind and which I hadn't even known about until this morning.
Okay, so it sounds like it's worth looking at, and also in your PDF, if people want to get meters for calibrating, reading this stuff, you've got some links there to some meters and so on. If people want to be able to measure it for themselves, which is great. There's a lot of information in this PDF of yours.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Thank you for the opportunity just to share this with people. Because a lot of people just don't believe it. They really, to this day, they do not believe that there are any dangers in using all the devices that we now take for granted, and which I love. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I love this technology, but you've got to be very careful how you utilize these devices. For instance, if you're using a smartphone, then try and use it on speaker mode if you possibly can. Obviously, in public, that's almost impossible to do. And if you can, get some sort of earphone device where you can distance yourself from the smartphone itself. In other words, don't carry on long conversations with your smartphone bang next to your ear. That's the worst thing you can do.
Okay, now what about if your smartphone's in your pocket? Is it going to be affecting you all the time?
It can, depending on the device itself. Usually, it's not too bad when it's not receiving or communicating. But as soon as you go online to make a conversation, or even if you're getting an SMS message, you'll find that if I use my meter and I'm, within a meter or so of the person using the device, my meter will literally go off scale. And that's 2,000 is the maximum reading on my scale. That's microwatts per square centimetre, I think it is. And I think I say in my PDF here, I consider anything on my meter above 10 to be in the dangerous range. Certainly if you're exposed to that for long periods of time. Even if we refer to microwave ovens, I'm not saying throw them out. I'm saying when you use them, as soon as you switch the thing on, get right away from the device itself, 3 or 4 meters away if you can, while it's actually cooking whatever you're cooking or heating whatever you're heating.
Okay, that's good advice. Well, this has been fascinating. Have you got any, sort of other last things that you want to share, or is Joy there and wants to share something as we wrap up?
John only believed me when he got a meter.
Can you hear that? She's saying, John only believed me when he got his meter.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of food for thought here, and I say people should go and actually look at because you've got so much more that you haven't covered all the details that they'll find in the PDF. So thank you heaps for being on the show again today, John.
My pleasure, Tony.
And we'll be having you and Joy back again. Well, there's so many more subjects to yet cover, probably after Christmas.
Okay, we'll look forward to that.
Thank you. As I mentioned at the beginning, folks, I had some issues with one of my pieces of equipment dying because a lot of my audio equipment is getting pretty old. But one of the things that people comment about often to me is the quality of the audio in A Minute to Midnight compared to so many other people's broadcasts and so on. And the reason for that is because I've worked as an audio professional for years. Plus, I've pride myself in having good equipment. So it's a bit of a mixture of, I guess, skills and equipment. So I know some people are well-meaning and trying to offer help, with cost-effective solutions and so on. And whilst I don't like to spend a lot of extra money, I also realise that quality does come with a bit of a price. And so I was blessed to be able to borrow my friend Ross's console to record this show on. That's a temporary solution, and yesterday in a bit of a panic, I sort of let people know what was going on. I did get some donations. I'm so grateful for people that donated to help towards getting a replacement. And A Minute to Midnight, we do run 100% on donations, and I'm still a wee way off being able to get something. At least I have the borrowed mixer for the moment. But folks, if you want to help out, you can donate at aminutetomidnight.com by however you want, credit card or PayPal, or send donations other ways, and you can do that at aminutetomidnight.com. Not that there's any pressure, but if people do want to help out, it's always greatly appreciated. And of course, you can find all our shows at aminutetomidnight.com, as well as on YouTube and on iTunes. And all the music that's used in the shows I write, play and record, and of course I need the console to do that as well. And you can download free music on our website if you want. There's a couple of albums of downloadable free music there too. That's about it for this show. I have some more good shows coming up between now and Christmas, so we will catch you with those hopefully in a few days' time. Until then, have a great week. God bless, and we will catch you again soon. This is Tony saying goodbye until then.